Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Generative AI podcast, Mindstix. I'm Saloni, and I'm joined here with me today by Roshan Kulkarni, who's the CEO and founder at Mindstix. Hi, Roshan. Welcome to the podcast.
Saloni, excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise.
Yeah.
So let's talk, Roshan, about generative AI. I know your team at Mindstix has been working on, Gen AI and everything around it, especially in the enterprise context for over a year. um, just curious, AI machine learning overall has been there for almost like 2 decades, right? But something changed in the past, say, year or so. What was it? What was the flip switch?
Yeah, I think Saloni, interesting question to kick this off. For the most part, I'd say it's not just been a couple of decades. If you think about it, the early underpinnings of AI
Mm-hmm.
germinated as early as 1950s, right?
Okay.
And quite a bit has been evolving since
Hmm.
then. But what has happened in particular last couple of years has been a culmination
Right.
of multiple of these work streams or progresses
Mm-hmm.
really coming together at a moment of, it was an aha moment,
Hmm.
right, for the industry in some sense.
Right.
So if you look at the pace of evolution in the semiconductor space, first
Hmm.
of all,
Yeah.
right, the progress that we've made, of course, with the Moore's law, and the density of
Hmm.
semiconductors has been evolving very
Yeah.
drastically, right? I mean, from the time when something like a 45 nanometers to a 32 nanometers was an industry standard about a
Hmm.
decade ago, to today where we've surpassed 14
Yeah.
nanometers as well, right? So about 5 or 7 nanometers being the more
Hmm.
prevalent density. Not only that, some of the approaches around um, stacking and packaging in the
Okay.
semiconductor industry have
Right.
made impressive leaps in the last several
Yeah.
years. As well as if you think about not just the density is going up
Hmm.
for the semiconductor
Hmm.
industries, it's also the yields that are going up
Yeah.
in
Makes
terms
sense.
of if you look at what percentage of
Hmm.
uh, the units that come out of the lithography
Right.
process meet a certain quality standard, it
Hmm.
implies that the yields have been consistently going
Consistent.
up,
Hmm.
right? Now that's sort of one dominant shift.
Hmm.
If you look at the second dominant shift, uh, is that enterprises have no longer needed truck rolls
Hmm.
to be able to tap into the power of GPUs and
Hmm. True.
TPUs. Because of the prevalence of cloud computing,
Yeah.
you can call it lease them, rent them,
Right.
subscribe to them on a need
Hmm.
basis. And so that's been another barrier,
Correct.
or one major barrier that has gone away, right? Another thing that has, of course, happened in the last 5 odd years has been, a little more than 5 odd years, has been the the prevalence and the acceptance of deep learning neural networks
Correct.
uh, as a potent model, right? Call it
Okay.
a
Right.
training model, if you will.
Hmm.
But most significantly in the deep learning space has
Hmm.
been uh, the opportunity that we can now have parallelism,
Hmm.
right? So if you look at something like a TensorFlow or a
Yeah.
PyTorch
Yeah.
today, we're no longer talking about single node units that can read the underlying data and use it for
Right.
training. First
Hmm.
of all, you are able to partition the data,
Hmm.
partition or
Right.
shard the data in a suitable way, and then the model training itself can happen in a vastly
Correct.
parallel or a distributed
Absolutely.
sort of an approach.
Yeah.
So that has led us to be able to train models
Hmm.
as well, um, which are much larger, train models in a reasonable amount of time
Hmm.
with massive amounts of data.
Right.
If you just take an example for last few years, right? When BERT first came out,
Hmm.
what was it, about 350 million parameters, and that
Hmm.
was not too long ago. About, I think,
Hmm.
the year 2020.
Hmm.
Um, a year later, GPT-2 came out,
Hmm.
and that was 1.5 billion
Hmm.
parameters in the model,
Hmm.
right? Just a year later,
Yeah.
almost, right? You're not talking about just a multiplier of a 2x or a 4x. This is the
Absolutely.
order of magnitude growth
Yeah.
in the model
Yeah.
size. And then another couple of years later, GPT-3,
Correct.
has been another leap, order of
Absolutely.
magnitude, right? What is it, 170
Yeah.
billion
Yeah.
parameters or so. So I'd say that the ability to train
Hmm.
models, large models, has become feasible because
Correct.
of the parallelism in which one can
Correct.
train,
Makes
right?
sense. Hmm.
You could split the layers in the model and train them
Hmm.
independently. You could uh, take the local data and
Hmm.
then create local gradients in the model
Hmm.
and then synthesize them, right, at a
Over
higher
time.
level
Yeah.
of abstraction. So I'd say that has been also the third significant change in some ways.
Okay.
Um, that is unlocking a lot of
Hmm.
this potential here, Saloni.
Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting. I mean, it makes you think, right? I mean, everything that you said, it's thought provoking. Recently, I came across the article that you've published that talks about the four major leaps, in the space of enterprise AI,
sure.
that will basically radically change everything the future holds for it. Can you shed some light on it for our audience today?
Yeah, absolutely. And the article came about spur of the moment inspiration. I was thinking through, right, what's the wave that we are really staring at here?
Hmm.
How is it this going to hit us?
Right.
As at Mindstix, we do a fair bit of digital transformation work
Absolutely.
for customers, and we always looking out for what's on the horizon, right?
Yeah.
What's beyond the next mountain and the next, right?
What's it that we can do,
Yeah,
next?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so the article really talks about what I believe are the four sort of major waves or leaps that
Right.
we're staring at,
Hmm.
right? The first being, we just talked about large
Hmm.
models and whatnot. um, the notion that I do not have to train the models from the ground up,
Hmm.
the
Correct.
notion that the models are available to me just
Hmm.
like any other cloud service is
Right.
available to me,
Right.
uh, in a democratized
Hmm.
sort of
Correct.
manner, right? You pay per use,
Yeah.
cents per invocation
Yeah.
kind of a model. And there's another interesting facet to it that, sure, last several years, pre-trained models have been available.
Available.
So
Hmm.
if you look at, say, something like the Salesforce Einstein,
Hmm.
right? There have been models
Hmm.
that let you do things like sales forecasting,
Yeah.
models that let you do things like lead qualification, right?
Correct.
Lead ranking, and so
Correct.
on. Similarly, McKinsey has talked
Hmm.
about models they offer. I think
Yeah.
the under the Quantum Black
Yeah.
offering,
Yeah.
um, where they have models specialized to industries, whether it's a finance or healthcare, and,
Correct.
and so
Yeah.
on, right? Palantir, similarly, in
Hmm.
their low code
Yeah.
platforms and Foundry and so on, also talk about ML models that are available,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Now, in all of these cases, the models were pre-trained, yes, but they were also specialized,
Hmm.
right? So they were attuned to uh, addressing a narrow set of
Certain set of, okay, yeah.
capabilities, right?
Right.
What changed in LLMs, though, of course, is
Hmm.
that these models were trained on massive swaths of the internet,
Correct.
right? All sorts of unstructured data that was
Yeah.
crawled, and so these models, in some ways,
Hmm.
one does actually look at them as broadly generalized
Right.
models, right? So now you're getting broadly
Right.
generalized,
Right.
pre-trained models
Models.
available in a democratized sort of
Correct.
manner as an API, nothing more than an API,
Correct.
right? So these models have become an integral part of API economy,
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
you will,
Hmm. So we're talking
right?
about accessibility, I mean, in a way.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
right? And not only that, the cost per invocation, if you will, or
Correct.
the cost for a given number of tokens to use these models has also been drastically
Right.
dropping, as we've
Right.
already seen in the last 18 months or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second facet of this
Hmm.
has been, I mean, go back about 5 years ago and think of even some of the best conversational bots or chat bots, right? Natural
Hmm.
language interfaces that
Hmm.
we've seen. And there was always a struggle that they seemed, call it, fairly robotic,
Hmm.
right? They
True.
seemed fairly rule driven.
Hmm.
It seemed like you had to stay within a certain bounds
There were
to be able to
limitations.
converse with it,
Right.
right? Um, but then I think because of the emergence of the transformer architecture
Okay.
and the attention mechanism, one of the big shift has been that we are now able to do uh, long range
Hmm.
sort of association between, right,
Got it.
words and
Hmm.
terms, right, tokens in the
Right.
models, which something like RNNs did not allow
Hmm.
us to do, right?
Yeah.
It was always a short range
Hmm.
sort of an association.
Hmm.
And so that combined with, I think, the auto regression techniques that have
Hmm.
been used today, which
Okay.
essentially means that before I spit out the next word in the
Hmm.
response, I'm also going to incorporate the previous words
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
response, right?
Makes sense.
And so that has given us a huge leap in the linguistic capabilities
Understood. Hmm.
of the model. And I think the reason that matters goes to the heart of who we are as humans,
Hmm.
right? Some of the technologies that have caught on like
Hmm.
wildfire are not just by the merit of, not by the
True.
technical merits alone,
Hmm.
but because they relate to who we are as a human
True.
being, right? Think of the touch screen in your pocket.
Yeah.
It's just so intuitive,
Yeah.
right? You touch and you click and
Yeah.
you pinch and you
Yeah.
zoom, right? And so the moment the computational barrier
Hmm.
goes away, I
Yeah.
no longer have to deal with SQL as a language
True.
to be able to extract my data.
Yeah.
That's another barrier,
Yeah.
another significant barrier that has gone away, right? The
Yeah.
linguistic power of these models,
Absolutely.
how they are able to reflect the nuance
Yeah.
of the human language,
Right.
I would say.
Makes sense. It's
Yeah.
almost like an extension to what you're doing on a very day-to-day basis.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, the third thing I talk about in that post is if you look at broadly the last 25 years of the
Mm-hmm.
technology industry,
Hmm.
um, much of data and insights
Mm-hmm.
that lead to decision making in the
Mm-hmm.
business uh, has heavily leaned on structured
Okay.
data, right? So
Right.
you're talking about, hey, query something for me from a OLTP database,
Yeah.
or aggregate stuff from my transactional databases into a OLAP-like environment or
Right.
data warehouse-like environment.
Hmm.
Aggregate structured clickstream information and then
Yeah.
present
Hmm.
insights, or even for that matter present something based on, say, predictive modeling and
Hmm.
so on,
Hmm.
right? Interestingly enough, Saloni, only about 20% of the data in
Hmm.
the modern enterprise is structured, right?
Yeah.
So whether you're talking about product information,
Yeah.
you're talking about training information, you're talking about meeting notes, you're talking about requirement
Yeah.
specifications, legal documents,
Yeah.
much of this is all unstructured, right?
True.
And for a long time, the best that technology could do
Hmm.
was either enable some kind of a keyword search, some
Yeah.
kind of a semantic search, maybe to some extent
Hmm.
summarization of this content,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, but I think the real unlock here
Hmm.
with LLMs has been the ability to now not only summarize but to build question answering
Absolutely.
capabilities, right? Build logical reasoning capabilities,
Inferencing. Yeah.
inferencing
Right.
on top of the unstructured data in the
Hmm.
enterprise. So I certainly think that's a huge leap,
Yeah.
and because all the creative minds
Hmm.
in companies across the world are going to think, how do we take this potent power now,
Hmm.
right? There's a
Yeah.
whole bunch of use cases that were almost not even feasible
Hmm.
until the last few years
True.
ago. And we had built data lakes, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we had dumped a ton of information into those data
Hmm.
lakes.
Hmm.
Even a modest size enterprise
Yeah.
today talks about, not just several terabytes, but tens of terabytes or
Hmm.
hundreds of terabytes of information dumped
Hmm.
into data lake
Yeah.
environments today, right? Um, but nobody knew what's the right hammer to use to knock on it
Yeah.
and to start to extract some value from it.
Right.
And I think that time is coming
Is
now.
now.
Yes. uh, so that was the third
Mm-hmm.
wave that comes to mind. And last but not the least is this idea that humans have invented a new programming language
Hmm.
without really inventing one. Okay.
Okay.
um, the in some ways the
Hmm.
coolest programming language of the year 2022
Hmm.
was English, right?
Yeah.
The fact that
True.
you could now structure your prompts
Makes
to
sense.
spar with
Yeah.
LLMs. Of course, I think the verdict is not yet out in terms of what are the best orchestration
Hmm.
models
Yeah.
when you're building this prompting capability.
Hmm.
And so, frameworks like LangChain, etc., are acting as enablers
Yeah.
for those, right? But I think I no longer, like
Hmm.
we were talking about before, I no longer have to grapple with SQL or any
Hmm.
kind of a domain
True.
specific language when all I can do is query something in the
Correct.
natural language.
Correct.
Yes.
Super interesting. I think what you said, the last point was very nice. I think somewhere I've even read that the best, I think, skill that you'd need as, somebody who's working in the generative AI
Yeah.
space is to have great, English chops. So I
Yeah.
think that that's pretty much it. So,
That's right. And
yeah,
also the number of tokens that models can accept
yeah,
now are
correct,
becoming longer. So it's
correct.
enabling prompt engineering in some ways
Right.
to go further along
Absolutely.
as well. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
So I know your teams at Mindstix have been working in the space of generative AI. Are there any very common use cases that you see when you speak to your customers that come up in, of course, in the enterprise AI context?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in many ways, uh, a lot of the creatives are being given a new hammer, a shiny new hammer. And so it's also been a little bit of a wild west.
Hmm.
Let's use this hammer on, where everything seems like a nail right now,
Yeah.
right? But specifically in the enterprise context,
Hmm.
one can look at it both from an external lens and an internal
Okay.
lens. Right now, we do a lot of work in domains like e-commerce and retail and
Right.
CPG. We also do a lot of work in areas like digital
Hmm.
transformation for
Hmm.
enterprises, right?
Yeah.
Driving business transformation, change
Right.
management, aided by digital
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
innovations. So, a couple of use cases come to mind. I mean, we could go on and on
Hmm.
about this, Saloni. One immense one in the space of personalized product discovery,
Okay.
right? Coming back to what I was saying earlier, search being largely either keyword based or
Hmm.
somewhat full text search or
Hmm.
semantic based search, but now the ability to
Hmm.
converse with your buyer, with your customer in an automated manner,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
Understanding their uh, preferences, understanding the nuance of their
Hmm.
expectations, and being able to throw the results
Yeah.
in a very pointed fashion,
Correct.
uh, right?
Yeah.
So, in some ways, in a world where there is, I mean, some of the customers we work with,
Hmm.
for example, right, have product catalogs that run into several million SKUs,
Yeah.
and I'd say the expanse of options available, in
Hmm.
fact, is off-putting for some customers, right?
Hmm.
As a buyer, I want to know what's relevant to me in a much more pointed sense. Do
Correct.
not throw me throw
Correct.
200 results on my
Correct.
face, right?
Yeah.
Give me the five that matter the
Mm-hmm.
most, and I can choose
True.
and move on,
True.
right? In my experience, so product discovery
Hmm.
is a huge one.
Okay.
Not just enabling an effective search, eliminating say null search results or
Right.
eliminating right
Hmm.
irrelevant results in the response,
Absolutely.
but also sort of a conversational product
Makes
discovery, right?
sense.
So we've been building the platforms and frameworks
Hmm.
largely based on the foundation of
Understood.
LLMs
Hmm.
that allow for this.
Okay.
On the other side of the spectrum, one of the things we've seen is most large enterprises end up investing significantly in content creation.
Okay.
By that we mean whether it is content around the product,
Hmm.
use cases of the product, right, aspects around the benefits, selling techniques of the products, and
Hmm.
so on. And I mean, think of click browsing through any e-commerce website today. Uh, it's really the richness of that content
Hmm.
that's going to drive conversion,
Makes sense. Yeah.
right? Um, and up until now, much of that was painstakingly
Hmm.
curated by,
Yeah.
merchandising teams in
Absolutely.
companies, right?
Hmm.
A SKU in your ERP becoming a web SKU was a
Hmm.
journey itself, right?
Yeah.
And there's immense potential in content creation, particularly in
Right.
spaces like retail and e-commerce,
Absolutely.
that we see as well.
Okay.
Customer service is another area that we absolutely seeing being disrupted.
Okay.
I think much has been talked about it on the web as well
Hmm.
in recent times. But one of the interesting use cases we've had is where a customer calls in, and this was
Hmm.
a use case in the home insurance
Okay.
and home maintenance
Hmm.
services industry. Right, a customer calls in and says, "Hey, something's broken
Hmm.
in my home. Right, does my contract cover so and so?"
Okay.
Right. Turns out that answering this question is not that simple, right? Somebody
Yeah,
has to, and traditionally a customer rep has to dig in
I
through
can
uh,
imagine.
a
Yeah,
few hundred lines of a few hundred pages of
yeah,
text, a few hundred pages of the
yeah.
contract to be able to uh, pinpointedly
Hmm.
answer a
Absolutely.
question like that,
Yeah.
right? And we're seeing that some question answering capability like
Hmm.
this is now getting short circuited to a matter
Hmm.
of a couple of seconds response
Okay.
time, right? And not only that, not only does it give you a summarized
Hmm.
decision point, a
Hmm.
summarized answer,
Yeah.
if you will, it also points you to the relevant page on the contract, right?
Perfect.
Why did we infer what we inferred, right?
Fantastic.
So I think that's been a game changer as well in
Yeah.
the customer service
Yeah.
space. Yeah. So those are a few examples. I think we can go all day long
Yeah. We can have
to,
a separate session
yeah,
probably
possibly,
about the use cases.
possibly on
Yeah.
that. Yes.
So we've all heard this term AI mindset,
Yes.
being used overall. I mean, on the internet, everyone's talking about it. So I'm sure, like Mindsticks, at Mindsticks, your teams have probably adopted something like an AI mindset. So can you talk about, how do you go about this adoption, and what really is the AI mindset all about?
Yeah. Sure. Given that we are uh, a heavily creative and engineering focused
Mm-hmm.
team as well, there are a lot of internal unlocks,
Hmm.
right? I mean, more or less in the previous
Hmm.
question, we covered what the impact of this could be,
Hmm.
say, to the market or
Right.
external facing use cases,
Yeah.
right? Now, let me flip it around on a lot of
Hmm.
the inward facing use
Hmm.
cases
Hmm.
for us as a creative
Yeah.
engineering centric company here.
Hmm.
Uh, One, I think it's become a very potent tool in the call it the continuous learning
Hmm.
journey of an
Yeah.
employee, right? No longer is there a barrier of being able to say, look, this is new to me, I'm trying to learn something. uh, Whether it's a chat gpt or a bard, has now become Gemini, right?
Gemini. Yeah.
uh, has now become your learning companion,
Yeah.
uh, far more effective than what a traditional Google search
Absolutely.
would have
Yeah.
led you to, right? So learning and development
Mm-hmm.
is and something that we also seeing a lot of customers embrace it for learning and
Hmm. Hmm.
development today. The second one I would say is driving efficiencies around a lot of templatized boilerplate uh, coding and development use
Okay.
cases, right? Hey, here is set of uh, classes and functions I need to
Hmm.
write automation testing coverage for,
Hmm.
right? And so the moment you kind of spin it off that way,
Hmm.
you get the entire scaffolding code for the
Hmm.
test
Hmm.
harness
Yeah.
there, right? The third, of course, is something like a GitHub Copilot
Hmm.
that's starting to increasingly become a companion for
Right.
developers, right? So pure play in a coding sense. Hey, I need to, if I'm an SRE engineer, I want to create a Terraform template for
Hmm.
something.
Hmm.
If I'm an automation engineer, I need the scaffolding for my automation test
Hmm.
cases. If I'm a functional application developer, hey, can you write model classes and
Hmm.
controller methods for me? And so Copilot, in a sense, is uh, able to spit out a fair amount of coherent
Hmm.
code that
Yeah.
one can use in the
Hmm.
implementations.
Yeah.
The other area that comes to mind, Saloni, I would say, is just creative sparring.
Hmm.
I think every time I've seen somebody having a mind block,
Hmm.
trying to ideate, whether individually or as a group,
Yeah.
I think these conversational interfaces have become quite potent tools to punch through that mind block,
Yeah.
right? It brings perspective,
Hmm.
it brings new data points
Yeah.
when you're sparring with
Correct.
something like a chat gpt today.
Correct.
So especially for creative teams, I think
Hmm.
it's a phenomenal
Hmm.
boon
Yeah.
today. So yeah.
It's almost like an accelerator to your, process, whatever you've been following at
Oh
your
yeah,
work.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So this reminds me, I think there was a time when Steve Jobs talked about why he left computing.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I believe personal computers are like bicycles for the mind. I think that statement could not have been any more truer than the last couple of years.
Hmm. Yeah. True. Uh, let's, I know we're on the clock here,
Sure.
so just, to wrap up this conversation, just thinking about what could be, some of the success metrics around AI in an enterprise? Like, how would you measure success with AI?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one to pin down because uh, we are at a stage where there's quite a bit of evolution happening.
Okay.
Right? We are at a stage where we're seeing leaders and executives across the industry
Mm-hmm.
still grapple with the wave of change
Hmm.
that's happening. So, in some ways, what defines success, are the metrics more or less the same that were conventionally looked at
Hmm.
as. I mean,
Yeah.
when you look at a digital
Yeah.
transformation initiatives, yes, you are, weighing your investment with the returns. In
Correct.
some ways, some measures of ROI that are
Makes
constantly
sense.
happening. uh, there could be hard ROI measures in
Yeah.
terms of investment versus revenue uplift, margin
Hmm.
uplifts, and so
Hmm.
on, and the slightly softer ROI
Hmm.
measures in terms of maybe efficiencies that are
Okay.
harder to measure, cultural changes, cultural shifts in the organizations,
Hmm.
and whatnot, right?
Hmm.
So let's um, let's look at it two ways, right? So one is, can we start to measure our how how quickly are we embracing
Hmm.
um, our AI initiatives
Hmm.
themselves? Right now, one of the
Right.
things we have seen or we have advocated to customers
Mm-hmm.
is, don't be afraid to start small.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you can embrace certain POCs to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Proof of concepts to
Yeah.
begin with. You cannot think of sort of taking this as a freezing moment just because there is a pace of rapid change happening right now,
Hmm.
right? So start to embrace some POCs quickly, and then you could filter them down by almost a factor of 10. Let's say you're doing about 80 or 100 POCs in the
Hmm.
enterprise, right? Encouraging teams to pursue their ambitions
Absolutely.
using this new tool.
Hmm.
And a factor of 10, you're probably then looking at about 10 serious pilots happening
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
company, right? In
Hmm.
the enterprise.
Hmm.
And possibly two of those pilots going to production. So
Okay.
can you look at a ratio of a factor
Correct.
of 10
Correct.
to bring some early successes in
Hmm.
your AI journey,
Yeah.
right? So that's sort of one metric we look at. Um, the second one we would look at is, given the pace of change,
Mm-hmm.
I think most of these initiatives, and we strongly
Hmm.
advocate this, most of these initiatives should be looked at a fairly compressed
Okay.
amount of time, right? So
Hmm.
you're literally talking about concept
Hmm.
to go live in a matter of maybe 2 or 3 months. We are no
Okay.
longer talking about multi-year programs.
Hmm.
Yes, your vision and your roadmap could entail that,
Right.
but is the time to value
Hmm.
from your AI
Makes
investments
sense. Hmm.
uh, becoming a reality in a matter of a couple of
Hmm.
months?
Hmm.
So that's another metric we look at
Okay.
as well. Now, in terms of the more external metrics,
Hmm.
if you will,
Hmm.
I think those have not fundamentally changed in the
Okay.
sense of, if I'm looking at any other technology
Mm-hmm.
investment, right? How do I weigh between the
Hmm.
investment and the uplift
Yeah.
it's leading to my business?
Yeah.
So those KPIs I don't think have
Those
fundamentally
are still
changed.
relevant.
Yes. Another area that will change, though,
Hmm.
is given the somewhat non-deterministic nature of
Mm-hmm.
language models and
Mm-hmm.
um, the ability to measure accuracy,
Hmm.
truthfulness,
Hmm.
the ability to measure whether our guardrails are
Hmm.
effective and how effective are they.
Hmm.
Uh, Again, if you traditionally look at the security world,
Yeah.
it was more or less black and white.
Hmm.
Whether there is an incidence or there is not an incidence,
Hmm.
right? I think natural language and
Yeah.
LLMs have created some gray areas in trying to
Makes
classify
sense.
that
Yeah.
in some ways,
Yeah.
right? So when you're looking at your AI based applications operationally, I think it's, new metrics may be required to say, what's our accuracy level in the
Hmm.
responses. Do we have traceability in what it's producing?
Yeah.
Do we have
Yeah.
explainability in what it's producing?
Yeah.
So I think much more work needs to be done to be able to
Got it.
pin those kinds of metrics down.
Understood. Awesome. So yeah, thanks Roshan for all your insights today. I think it was very interesting for me personally to speak with you, and I've understood lot of like new perspectives around this. So thank you for joining us, and looking forward to maybe doing another session with you soon.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great conversation, Saloni.
Yeah.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Yeah,
All right.
thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah.